In 1971, a flight of an American Airlines plane had just taken off, and only a few minutes had passed since it took off when a passenger sitting at the very last seat called the air hostess over to him and handed her a letter with a smile. The letter contained only a few words which caused a stir throughout America. Who was that passenger, and why hasn't the FBI been able to find him, alive or dead, until today? Forget about finding him. America's most powerful intelligence agency has not been able to extract any information from this passenger for the last 50 years. Welcome back once again in this interesting video. Let's start with the incident that occurred on November 24, 1971, at Portland Airport. A man who looked like a businessman booked a ticket from Portland to Seattle and headed straight towards the plane. Back then in America, there were no security checks, no baggage screening, and no identity verification was done. The plane, a Boeing 727, was supposed to reach Seattle from Portland in just 45 minutes. A passenger, wearing sunglasses and carrying a briefcase, boarded the plane and sat down in his preferred seat at the very back of the plane. He ordered a drink of water and lit a cigarette. Up until this point, everything seemed normal because smoking was allowed on flights in the 70s. At exactly 2:58 p.m., the flight took off. As soon as it took off, the man turned around and, with a smile, handed an envelope to the air hostess sitting nearby. When the hostess, whose name was Florence Saffer, read the letter, the ground seemed to slip beneath her feet. The letter read, "I have a bomb, and I would like you to sit next to me." After that, the man opened his briefcase, revealing dynamite sticks and a detonator. In short, the plane had been hijacked, and there were 3 demands: $200,000 in cash, 2 parachutes, and a refueling truck at the nearest airport. At the end of his demands, he also told Florence indirectly that if anyone tried to act up, he would blow up the bomb. In addition to the hijacker, there were 35 passengers on board who were completely unaware of what was happening in the back of the plane. Florence went to the cockpit with the hijacker's demands and told the captain the whole situation. A second air hostess, whose name was Tina Maugham, also joined the hijacker to act as a messenger between the hijacker and the pilots. This was the first plane hijacking in American history that was carried out for ransom. For this reason, local authorities and the FBI decided to meet all the hijacker's demands. They knew the hijacker would not be able to get too far. The flight, which was supposed to land in Seattle in just 45 minutes, now had to stay in the air for another hour and a half, circling the airport. Meanwhile, the 35 passengers were told that the technical difficulties were causing problems with the landing. During this time, $20,000 worth of $10,000 bills were collected from Seattle National Bank, the serial numbers of which were recorded. 2 parachutes were also arranged through a nearby skydiving club. At 5:45 p.m., the plane landed, and, as promised, the hijacker was given a bag filled with cash and 2 parachutes. In return, the hijacker allowed 35 passengers and 2 crew members to disembark. However, the pilots and 2 flight crew members were told to remain on board. After fulfilling his demands, the hijacker allowed the plane to take off again, this time with him still aboard. He gave Tina, the air hostess sitting with him, special instructions for the pilots. The hijacker wanted the plane's landing gear and flaps to remain open, the altitude to be at 10,000 feet, the speed to be 320 kilometers per hour, and the plane to be flown straight to Mexico City. The pilot complied with most of the demands, but flying to Mexico City was not possible due to fuel constraints. The pilot offered the hijacker a couple of alternative locations to refuel. Eventually, the hijacker agreed to land at Phoenix. At the same time, local and federal authorities were continuing their efforts. Fighter jets were sent to follow the plane, but they were unable to maintain a slow enough speed. As a result, they began flying around the plane, keeping it in sight. In the darkness of the night, while the plane was on its way to Phoenix, the hijacker asked Tina to come to the cockpit. When Tina turned to close the cockpit door, the last thing she saw was the hijacker tying something around his waist. Then, the hijacker opened the plane's stairs and jumped out. What happened after that has been discussed for the last 50 years. 3 hours later, when the plane landed in Reno, a thorough search was conducted, but no traces of the hijacker were found. No money, no briefcase, nothing. The hijacker disappeared completely, and the FBI could not figure out whether he was alive or dead. The case became a mystery. Who was the hijacker? And how did he manage to deceive the entire country? The plane's steps were left open, clearly indicating that he had jumped somewhere between Seattle and Reno. The FBI started searching for evidence on the plane, but, unfortunately, they found only a tie, a hot cigarette butt, and one of the parachutes that had been left behind. The passengers and crew were interviewed, and a sketch of the hijacker was created based on the descriptions. The FBI tried to search between Seattle and Reno, but they couldn't figure out the exact location where he had jumped. The plane had been on autopilot, and its speed and altitude were already recorded. Based on this, the FBI determined the possible drop location and defined a search area of 45 square kilometers. This area, surrounded by dense forests and mountains, was thoroughly searched by teams, but no traces of the hijacker were found. There was so much cold in the area that everyone believed the hijacker had died in the wilderness. However, what happened next was beyond anyone's imagination. 9 years later, in 1980, an event occurred in Washington near the Olympia River. A child, playing with their parents, found 3 packets of bills on the riverbank. It was $5,800, and the serial numbers matched the bills that the hijacker had taken. This was the first break in the case after 9 years, but rather than solving the case, it made it more complicated. These bills were found 27 kilometers away from the drop zone, and it was initially assumed that the hijacker had lost the money while jumping. However, it was soon realized that the Columbia River, flowing in the opposite direction, made this theory unlikely. The money was found in sand that had been placed there 3 years after the hijacking, leading to speculation that the hijacker or an accomplice had deliberately hidden the money. The FBI continued their investigation but couldn't find any concrete leads. The hijacker's sketch, along with the serial numbers of the money, was published in newspapers, and rewards were announced for information leading to his whereabouts. But, despite all the efforts, none of the leads turned out to be fruitful. The case remains unsolved today, and the FBI still has no answers. The identity of the hijacker, D.B. Cooper, is still one of the greatest mysteries in U.S. history. And so, even after 50 years, the story of D.B. Cooper remains one of the most puzzling cases in American crime history.